The following program contains graphic material, including offensive language. Viewer discretion is advised.
It's Friday. Time to dig deeper. Welcome to Empty Wheel Fridays on the Nicole Sandler Show, featuring national security journalist and BS detector Marcy Wheeler. From EmptyWheel.net, Marcy is here to break down the chaos, connect the dots, and probably drop a few F-bombs along the way. This is Empty Wheel Fridays on the Nicole Sandler Show.
I think more than a few F-bombs are probably warranted today. This is the end of a week that, was more like a decade. So much happened this week, and it just doesn't let up. So
no, it doesn't.
No, but, this week gave us the first anniversary of this regime. So we made it through a year.
We're a quarter way done if he actually ever leaves office.
We'll do what if he ever leaves office?
We're a quarter way done if he ever leaves office.
Right, a quarter way done. I don't think we'll make it. He's got to be, he should be removed in a straitjacket. I mean, if a Democrat ever did the shit that he's doing, there would be no question. He'd be gone by now. He'd be in a padded room with a straitjacket on.
Yes. I want to go back and read a poem then we can talk about the straitjacket.
Okay.
And this is by a poet called Brian Bilston, who's a very funny poet, and it's called Mnemonic.
Okay.
30 days hath September, April, June, and November. Unless a leap year is its fate, February hath 28. All the rest hath 3 days more, excepting January, which hath 6,184.
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Anyway, now you know why I had to read the poetry.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I mean, Donald Trump is insane. And I was writing last week after reading the New York Times interview that the extent to which they sane washed him was really unprecedented. Yep. Because that interview, they were so excited about sitting down with Donald Trump for 2 hours that they couldn't. I actually wrote an entire post, which I did not publish, talking about all of the insane things that they just glossed over. But the primary one, which I wrote out the first time, I wrote a couple posts about this anyway, but the primary one was like, Donald Trump literally admitted to them that he needed Greenland because of his own psychological neediness, right?
Right.
In a follow-up post, I described that he believed that Venezuela was psychologically successful. So he's admitting to the New York Times, like, I am mentally ill and I am invading countries based on my own psychological need. And David Sanger created like 3 different excuses for the Greenland comment. He's like, oh, well, he's a real estate guy. That's why he said it. Please. It's like, no, the man is fucking insane. The man is literally fucking in public insane. And then he wrote an insane letter to the prime minister of
Norway,
right. Saying, I'm invading Greenland. One of the cool things about living in Ireland is, growing up in the United States, you're taught Vikings are Vikings, right? They're the same,
right?
And they're also a football team from Minnesota, but the Vikings are Vikings. But as soon as you get into Ireland, especially like where I live, Limerick, you come to understand that. And I said this on Blue Sky, and all of these Scandinavians are like, yeah, duh. I mean, Viking is a verb. It's not a nationality. Because you literally had in the 900s here in Ireland, you had Danish Vikings fighting with Norwegian Vikings fighting, so they're all fighting among themselves in the middle of Ireland, and going native literally. Mm-hmm. But so that's what Donald Trump was doing, like writing the Norwegian prime minister about why he had to steal Greenland when the Danes are different from the Norwegians, right?
Yeah.
And the reason the Danes have it is because Viking is a verb, not a nationality. But anyway, it was truly. So then everyone was like, God, this guy's insane. I'm like, yeah, well, the New York Times could have told you so, but they are so excited about sitting down with Donald Trump that they chose not to. And then he went to Davos. And as I said, there was this day, I forget what day it was because there are how many days? I'm going to say it again. Oh,
6,000 something.
Yeah.
Right.
I will go RT that on Blue Sky later on. So if people want to read it, he's a fun poet anyway. But you have this day where first Mark Carney gives a speech.
Yep. Another one.
Do you have it? By the way?
You know what? I don't have it cut up. I was going to. I just ran out of time. I've got a lot of it. I can't.
I'll just play a bit so people.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Let me. I can do that.
Anyway, you have the contrast of Mark Carney saying, "Okay, time to wake up, world," and it's basically what he said. Although I did do a post about the way in which he is citing Václav Havel, because I used to be an expert on the essay that he is relying on there back in my old day as an academic. And then you have the contrast of Donald Trump getting up and being the fucking racist, anti-Somali bigot, yelling at people just for hours and then hours more when, it's just like the man is literally insane and Republicans won't do anything about it. But the entire world is coming around to the fact. And then Mark Rutte, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but Vikings is a verb, not a nationality. Mark Rutte basically, I think, tricked Donald Trump into backing off. Like he basically said, hey, you can have bases in Greenland, and which is already in the contract, in the signed treaty that we have with Greenland. But Donald Trump is too stupid because, he's being gatekept by a fucking insane man, Stephen Miller.
Right.
So you have it.
You want to hear a little bit, Mark Carney? Here.
As coercion.
I just cued in the middle somewhere.
It means acting consistently, applying the same standards to allies and rivals. When middle powers criticize economic intimidation from one direction but stay silent when it comes from another, we are keeping the sign in the window. It means building what we claim to believe in. Rather than waiting for the old order to be restored, it means creating institutions and agreements that function as described. And it means reducing the leverage that enables coercion. That's building a strong domestic economy. It should be every government's immediate priority. Domestic economy, it should be every government's immediate priority. And diversification internationally is not just economic prudence, it's a material foundation for honest foreign policy, because countries earn the right to principled stands by reducing their vulnerability to retaliation. So Canada has what the world wants. We are an energy superpower. We hold vast reserves of critical minerals. We have the most educated population in the world. Our pension funds are amongst the world's largest and most sophisticated investors. In other words, we have capital, talent. We also have a government with immense fiscal capacity to act decisively. And we have the values to which many others aspire.
Booyah.
Canada is a pluralistic society.
Yeah, a little bit of Mark Carney. You should listen to the whole thing. Again, I was, recording audio. I was going to chop it up, but time.
Yeah. And as I said, the entire speech is bookended with a discussion of an essay that Václav Havel wrote in 1978 as part of the Charter movement, which was kind of the dissident movement that then would become the Velvet Revolution. And he argued, he's like, every day a greengrocer walks into his office and he puts up a sign, "Workers of the World Unite." Right. What if he just stopped one day? What if, and this came at a time of debate among Czech intellectuals about what it was to be a dissident and how you could make every ordinary people, whether ordinary people could engage in dissidence themselves. And so the idea behind Havel's piece was if everyone just stopped putting the sign up in the wall, yes, they're going to have retaliation. They're going to, get kicked out of the party. Their kids aren't going to go to nice schools. But that ideology was keeping the Soviet Union going. That ideology is what was sort of the ethical basis of what kept everything going. And so, Carney's use of it is in a sense awkward because the rest of his speech is the speech, including the clip that you just gave, is the speech of a guy who was twice a central banker, right, both in Canada and in the UK, which people often forget about. The world is so fucking lucky that Donald Trump intervened in that election and basically elected Mark Carney, because Mark Carney has a competence that really doesn't exist in the rest of the world. And, he's basically saying, it's as much as he's saying for a long time, we overlooked the ways in which the U.S. violated their values. I did a post that may have been this week, may have been last week, where I talked about, because my spouse and I it's our 25th wedding anniversary this year. Wow. And so I literally married into Europe 25 years ago. I was studying Czech before that, and when I was in the period when I was studying Czech, the people I studied with, they were from all over Europe, they were like, I don't understand how you still live in the United States. You're so quintessentially European, they said to me in 1997. And then, without missing a beat, they said, but you stay there and you fix it for the rest of us.
Wow.
And that was still is a tremendous weight on my shoulder. But anyway.
But Mark Carney, in his speech, also one of the big things, he was saying this is the end of American exceptionalism.
Well, that's my point about it is there is this idea, and honestly, I have been writing since I want to say 2002, 2003, that American exceptionalism did a lot of work in the United States. This belief that we were in some way privileged, and we were. And you know what? A lot of that privilege was based on immigration. Like the thing that made the United States different, and that Stephen Miller is trying to lecture Europe about. Ireland, frankly, has a lot of immigration now. And the way in which Ireland deals with it is as a diasporic nation. You can't find anyone in Ireland who doesn't have an immediate family member, or at least a cousin who has spent at least some time living overseas. They have cousins in Australia, the United States, Canada, so for Irish people, they are all acutely aware of the degree to which the rest of the world welcomed Irish people throughout, particularly the last 200 years, and throughout the period when Ireland was sort of the quintessential European colony. It was the first colony that then the UK and other European nations kind of rolled out all over the world. And so in Ireland, we're in this phase where okay, well, we're welcoming these people who were made refugees by, and I'm aware of this, a bunch of my taxi drivers are Afghans, and they've been here since America's invasion of Afghanistan, and Ireland welcomed them, and a bunch, there were American abuses during the War on Terror. There was the grotesque American abuse response to the financial crash of not holding the masters of the universe accountable for crashing the entire economy. And then people around the world suffered. People around the world, in the United States, it was disproportionately African Americans, lost their wealth because the masters of the universe fucked up and gambled. And we're now in this position where that's going to happen again with AI. And so Mark Carney was basically saying, we have to stop overlooking the shit that the United States does, because they're not, I mean, it was worthwhile for a while because they protected the shipping lanes, but now they're murder boating in Venezuela. So we have to start being honest about what the United States does. And, that's how I think he was using the Havel piece. But it is very much, I mean, it only makes sense if you're saying we no longer need to invest in this myth that the United States is somehow better than everyone else. I mean, obviously, even during the Cold War, the United States did a bunch of stuff that was that we excused in the name of the Cold War. But after the Cold War ended, the United States still has been continued to be treated as this exceptional nation when, they're not the only country anymore with immigration. I mean, obviously, much of Europe, a lot of the immigrants are from former colonies. And that's what I think Americans often forget, right? Like that in the UK, you had this openness to former colonies. And so, yeah, you've got a shit ton of South Asians, but guess what? There's a reason for that. Or in France, you have a bunch of Arabs and Africans. Guess what? That's the legacy of colonialism. And frankly, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so, but it, it's important, I think, for Americans then, like Carney's right, of course. And Carney, it really pissed off. Carney left before Donald Trump came. And today, before we started taping, remember we tape a couple hours before we go on, Scott Bessent was basically stoking Alberta's separationists, right-wing separationists. He's saying, well, maybe Alberta will, and he's comparing it with Texas. And it's like, I think Americans don't even understand, like Greenlanders, they get free healthcare, right? Yes, they look at the United States and like, why would anybody want to become American anymore? You don't get free health care. You've got guns every fucking place. Yep. You don't really have to get beyond, A and B, That's the it. Guns everywhere and the shitty health care. And there's really no there's not much left, especially, and this was true even before Stephen Miller started sending out his paramilitary goons onto the streets. And I think that, as I said, I've been writing about this for decades, that at some point that myth stopped working, the American exceptionalism. And once you lose that myth of American exceptionalism, then you've got, people who aren't getting their share of American success. Last year, the super rich got even super richer, right. And the money didn't go to average people. And that is really the source of the decline of American democracy, is that the super rich are running everything. And so you can't pass. And that is something that I'm acutely aware of, having moved to Ireland. There's the Vikings, there's the healthcare, and there's just not the inequality. Ireland has rich people, but there's nowhere near the inequality that you have United States in the United States.
Right. And it's getting worse day by day.
And it's getting worse. Yeah. And so, and so in Ireland, the government actually says, here, how can we spend the money to do stuff that's good? They fight about what that good is. They don't fix the housing problem, but, they'll do stuff to improve the country on a basic level. And, I just think a lot of that hasn't happened in the United States for a long time. And so, of course, that is going to drive angst and frustration. And Stephen Miller. Now, I think that it is, I've been saying this for how many weeks? 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that I think that we are in this flux.
Right.
And I think that this is an even fluxier week than the last three, right? We're still in this moment where one of the things that's most remarkable about this moment, and again, we tape at 12, so we're only beginning to see the pictures of Minnesota's general strike.
Right, 12 Eastern.
But there is this palpable frustration in the White House that they have not been able to make the goon propaganda work. Right. Over the last day, Stephen Miller has posted, I think, 4 things on Shitter about children, because there's that image of the 5-year-old kid in Minnesota being snatched, right, with the bunny ears. And
if you've seen, I don't know if you saw Antonia Hilton's report on the 16-year-old with his father being chased and rammed by ICE, and the arrest of both of them. The kid is 16 years old and he's a citizen. The whole thing was just horrific because he was taping in the car. Oh, it was horrible. I mean, I've got it, but it's long. But yeah, terrible story. But we're seeing more and more of these.
We're seeing more and more. And they sent JD Vance to Minnesota, and he said things that were completely unhinged. It's like he doesn't actually know what's going on in Minnesota for real. And people keep making, I've been talking for months now about what a kind of unprecedented liar Tricia McLaughlin is, the DHS spokesperson. Was it Jamal Bowie who did a piece in New York Times about how what's going on is it's Radley Balco did a piece in New York Times this week. Remember, so Radley Balco, if you don't know, has written, he wrote kind of one of the most important books on the militarization of police. So he's an expert on this, but he wrote an op-ed in New York Times this week where he's like, look, I'm an expert on this shit, but we are seeing lies now from DHS that aren't lies to kind of explain away abuses. What they are lies that kind of wallow in the ability to lie. And he really nailed it. It's definitely worth reading, but he really nailed it in the sense that the only way to make sense of the lies that Trump's people told in the wake of Renee Good's killing are that because none of them were coherent. Like the 5 lies that were told were all incoherent. Like what Tricia said, Tricia McLaughlin basically issued her boilerplate. Oh, we shot somebody. Terrorism, rammed. We shot some. It's like she has issued the same statement every time DHS shoots somebody. Donald Trump claimed that Jonathan Ross had been run over. Yeah. Somebody misinformed him. Some people were claiming that Renee Good was a terrorist. Some people weren't. None of it was coherent. And sort of the problem, the point to me was they're sort of gleeing in their ability to themselves tell inconsistent stories. It's not like going back to communist ideology where there was a coherent lie that was told over and over again. What we have now is we've got a complete disavowal of lying consistently. And really overnight we saw, let me see if I can get her name, when they arrested Nekima Levy Armstrong in Minnesota. She knew she was going to be arrested. Her attorney was at her house when she arrested. DHS took a picture of her. Where
I've got that. So here is the original photo, and this was tweeted out by, of all people, Kristi Noem. So this is her tweet on it. She said that they arrested her. By the way, Nekima Levy Armstrong is a civil rights attorney herself. And so this is the picture. It's kind of fuzzy, but she just, she's there. She's looking kind of normal. Then the White House tweeted out.
Well, let me interrupt before we even go there.
Okay.
It is improper to even release that first picture. That's not something before this Trump administration that DOJ or law officials would do. And of course, one of the things that's happening is DOJ knows that the FBI, with the exception of Kash Patel, which is a pretty big exception, still adheres to those rules because it fucks up your ability to try a case But DHS breaks those rules all the time. So that in and of itself is not something you do if you actually want to prosecute somebody. So that by itself, and we're kind of immune to it now. We're numb to it, that itself was improper. And then...
Okay. And then the White House took that photo. You can see she's looking stern, but there's nothing. Well, they put out this tweet. Arrested. Look at her face. It looks like she's crying, like sobbing.
And they've darkened it?
Oh, yeah, they did. Darkened her skin, made her crying, and put this text: arrested far left agitator Nakima Levy Armstrong for orchestrating church riots in Minnesota.
And there were no riots,
no.
Right? So, it'll be an interesting case going. It would have been an interesting case without even this, because it is certainly civil disobedience that pushes the limits, and we'll see how that limit goes. As you said, she's an attorney, so she certainly knows the limits. They're charging her under the Ku Klux Klan Act, by the way, which incidentally also, which is a conspiracy. They tried to charge her with the FACE Act, which, remember, used to prohibit kind of interfering with people's ability to get into abortion clinics. Now DOJ is applying it to anti-abortion clinics. But the magistrate judge refused those charges, said there was not probable cause to support those charges, but did approve the conspiracy to commit to infringe on people's rights. So it'll be an interesting case going forward. But that meme, and when I think Daniel Dale was the first person to get a response from the White House to get confirmation that they did alter the picture.
Wow.
But when other journalists asked the White House about it, the response was, "Oh, the memes will continue." And it's like, well, you can't prosecute. That's going to make it. That's going to invite malicious prosecution, especially Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi flew in for this. There are reports that the actual prosecutors, I haven't seen a docket yet. Like, there was a docket and then they closed it. But, they've got out. Pam Bondi had already been soliciting prosecutors from around the Midwest. And partly because, of course, 6 people resigned when DOJ refused to let them investigate whether Good was murdered. The other thing that happened this week is both her own family got an independent autopsy done, and then Hennepin County announced the results of their autopsy and just described it as murder, which is a technical term for them, meaning that somebody else killed her.
Okay.
It's not a criminal charge, but obviously, but what the autopsy that her family paid for or got makes clear is that she was hit by 3 bullets, once in her arm, which was probably the first one, the second one in her right breast, which was the second one, the third one was in her head, and that's what killed her. That's the only thing that was fatal, and that again means that Ross's decision to keep shooting is what murdered her, is right. What,
and after he was on the side of the car too. He was in no danger from her car. She was
and then when that doctor came up and tried to tend her, when the fire department came and got her, and remember there was a delay there too, she still had a pulse. It was an irregular pulse, but she might have been, they might have been able to save her if the initial doctor had been able to do CPR, but by the time the delay happened. And so, we're not going to get any kind of resolution in the short term. And of course, last Friday, DOJ announced subpoenas to Jacob Fry and Tim Walz and a bunch of, including Ellison, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General
Right.
of Minnesota, and they're basically trying to prosecute them for their public comments, which is going to be really hard to do. The subpoena due date is, they actually asked for testimony. The subpoena due date is February 4th. We'll see whether Minnesota challenges the subpoenas altogether. Remember that Tish James did that in New York when they were trying to investigate her investigations. And one of, like the notion that saying, take pictures of ICE because we will do something about their abuses after the fact, is a crime, is really problematic. And like one of the prosecutors who quit was willing to go ahead and investigate that, but not at the same time to shut down the investigation of Renee Good. But so 6 people quit there.
Yeah.
Some number, 5 or 6 quit in civil rights. Although Harmeet Dillon says they weren't all exclusively because of the treatment of Renee Good. And so Pam Bondi is trying to bring in prosecutors from around the Midwest. Now, MSNBC has a weird story today saying prosecutors aren't giving warrants to people, and the substantiated thing is what I already told you, that the magistrate refused certain arrest warrants with regards to the protest of the Baptist Church, including for Don Lemon, by the way.
Yes,
and the Don Lemon arrest warrant is incredibly problematic because while he was there, he was like, I'm not part of this group, I am filming it. Like, so the notion that you could be charged for filming a protest is exceedingly problematic. We'll get into the Washington Post warrant that DOJ is.
The reporter who they broke into her house.
But the other thing, and this is good and kind of crazy news from yesterday, I've been covering since September how many cases from DHS's invasion of Chicago collapsed, right? There was one day, September 27th, where 11 people were charged. And it was one of the first days that Kristi Noem came in. Greg Bavina was there. 11 people charged. All of those cases got dismissed. Many of them no-billed by a grand jury. But then, there were cases where it became clear that Greg Bavino had assaulted somebody rather than assaulting Greg Bavino. So one after another, they all got dismissed. Yesterday, on October 4th or 5th, DOJ charged a guy, last name Martinez. He's the guy charged immediately after Miramar Martinez, who, remember, is the woman who was shot in circumstances very similar to the shooting of Renee Good. Same thing, shot multiple times, shot first the front, then the side, shot by a weapons instructor. Anyway, so the second Martinez, they charged him with soliciting a hit against Greg Bavino.
Right.
And I had been following it closely because it's sort of like, well, this might have merit. I mean, like, there, I don't know what these texts are. So he was tried and acquitted yesterday. Right. Well, he was acquitted. He was tried the day before, acquitted yesterday. And what it sounds like was, he was talking to both his brother and this other dude that he worked in construction with. And the other dude narked him out to the authorities. They were talking on Snapchat. And basically what Martinez was doing was basically saying, the Latin Kings are going to go after Bovino. Right. And DOJ claimed that he was a Latin King. And then just a couple weeks ago, they gave that up. They said, we're not actually going to prove that he's a Latin king. And so the judge threw out all the evidence that relied on him being a Latin king. Mm-hmm. And without that evidence, they had nothing. And then his defense attorneys then there was a discussion about a gun. And his brother testified, and his brother said, yeah, I have a concealed carry permit. And we liked this gun because it has a saint on the handle that helped our father get better, gave this like very compelling story about what the gun was about. And it wasn't anything having to do with Greg Bovino. And then the rest of his defense was basically like everyone, Martinez is from that same neighborhood where Miramar Martinez, they're not related. As far as I know, they're not related. That same neighborhood where she was shot. So it's a predominantly Latino neighborhood, and everyone in the neighborhood was like, they're doing horrible things. And that was the context of the comments. And so he's acquitted. And that was a huge case. That is a case that they relied on when they went to the Supreme Court and said, we need to invade Chicago. And it just blew up. And, partly because of the focus on Minnesota and the focus on funding and the focus on the batshittery in Switzerland, the fact that case collapsed. Did I talk about the laser pointer case, by the way?
No, not, no.
No, that was last week.
That was last week.
But it's a similarly insane case. This guy, same thing. The jury was, the trial was one day. He was acquitted. In that case, Secret Service arrests an unhoused person in the Ellipse, so outside of the White House. And he's got what they describe as a laser pointer. They shine a flashlight in his eyes. He shines what they describe as a laser pointer at them. And because Marine Force One is landing, the Secret Service agent accuses the unhoused person of trying to shine a light in the pilot of Marine Force One and to take down Donald Trump. Now, when I first saw that there was an acquittal, because I don't think any journalist was at the trial. And so, because it was like this nothing, it was like this weird case. When I first started writing about the fact that there was acquittal, a bunch of people who are pilots and lawyers were like, it's really hard to win that case because that is a very serious thing to do to pilots. And I looked at the exhibits, and the exhibits show that he was acquitted based on, like, the only thing his defense attorneys do, public defenders who are, God, going to save the republic if anyone does, was to show that to show the distance of where Marine Force One was coming in and where this guy was actually standing. And also they showed that it was basically a cat toy. The quote unquote laser pointer was what you play with your cat to make them think they're chasing a little mouse. And furthermore, the Secret Service agent appears to have lied to the grand jury to get that indicted. So, so I'm going to get the transcript for that so we can see more details. But that was an unbelievable faceplant for DOJ. This was, in D.C. So Jeanine Pirro, again, Juicebox Jeanine. But you have these two huge cases, and when they were charged, everyone was making a big deal. Oh my God, this guy is trying to kill Donald Trump in Marine Force One. Oh my God, this other guy is trying to kill Greg Bovino with the Latin Kings. And both of those cases just completely collapsed. And that's really important to point out and to really highlight because they really show how DOJ, it's like DOJ is trying to manufacture this threat. Like Donald Trump is under threat and Greg Bovino is under threat. Right. And their efforts are so pathetic. Like, and the other thing is, if the Latin Kings really were trying to kill Greg Bovino, they didn't investigate that. There's this great piece in the New York Times yesterday that everyone should read. It's a New York Times. It is anecdotes of people who've been fired by the FBI describing what a fucking shit show it is under Kash Patel.
And he just fired more today or overnight.
Yeah. And we've heard many of these anecdotes before. Like there's the one where he went to the UK and he's meeting with the Five Eyes, and he only cares about basically tourist things. He wants to go sailing, or he wants to meet the king, and then he threatens to post a picture with a bunch of Five Eyes people who are undercover, and he doesn't have enough sense. But to not do that. There are multiple cases where, they describe during the Charlie Kirk killing investigation where Bongino and Cash are literally talking. Like, they're not talking about the investigation; they're talking about what they can tweet out, it is about how one of the important points that they make is the way in which Cash is fluffing his numbers is by assigning FBI agents to wander the streets and claiming credit for any arrest, however small, on the streets, rather than and a big underlying point though of that piece, which everyone should read because it's hilarious and depressing, is that FBI in the last year has stopped doing the kinds of complex investigations that only they do. So, think counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cyber. They're not doing those investigations. And the arrests that they're making in those areas are kind of there's stuff left over. And so if you look at this Greg Bovino thing and you look at what we learned in the trial, maybe the Latin Kings are hunting down Greg Bovino, but the way in which that investigation was conducted, the way in which they rushed while they were in the middle of this invasion to bring out this flashy arrest without actually testing whether there was a hit at all. Right. As his defense attorneys described, there's no money that changed hands. There was no ongoing, it was just literally a tweet. And so they've been prosecuting this guy November, December, January for 3 months. I think he was in detention for some or all of that time. He's going to end up getting deported. The guy who testified against him was doing it so he wouldn't get deported. But it was all a tweet. It was all a couple of Snapchat posts. And that, it kind of says so much about this attempt to create the kind of conflict that Stephen Miller believes he can use to make his goon squads popular. And it's not, that's not working. All of the polling shows that he's badly underwater on immigration. Well, he's underwater on immigration. ICE is destroy ICE is polling 50-50 right now, which is saying a lot across the country. Yeah. And people, there are specific things like the snatching of that 5-year-old boy that are, and obviously the killing of Renee Good, that are really snowballing the problems with ICE. That the Kash Patel thing, by the way, also describes the problems of putting FBI. First of all, they describe that the reason FBI got lumped into ICE is because Donald Trump wanted to see FBI jackets involved in snatches.
Oh my God.
God. They describe how dangerous some of the things Kristi Noem does. But it also describes, it's a lot harder for FBI to go into a Latino neighborhood and say, is there a plot against Greg Bovino? Because now they are associated with ICE, and therefore you're not going to get people to cooperate with FBI. You've got, that you can't distinguish people. There's a guy who was murdered in a detention facility in El Paso, and of course, DHS said, it wasn't murder. He was kind of forcibly sticking his neck inside the hands of guards or something. Right. And there are 2 detainees who are witnesses to the murders, and DHS is trying to deport them very quickly. And a judge said, no, hold on, you can't do that. But, it used to be that there are ways that if you are an immigrant, you can get a visa to stay as a witness. And but the FBI is not going to have that kind of cooperation available because they are indistinguishable from ICE at this point. And ICE,
Right. And now DHS says it no longer has to give medical treatment to the detainees. And also back to this whole thing, what you were talking about, the case with Martinez and attempting to pay for a hit on Greg Bovino. You point out that this is the 15th case of 31 that have collapsed in Chicago since the invasion, and you tracked them all in
well, I didn't track them all. Right. John Seidel, who's at Chicago Sun-Times, support your local independent media because they are doing a tremendous job in covering this stuff. And he does a great job. He covered the trial really closely. So I recommend people go to Chicago Sun-Times and read his coverage. But yeah, I had tracked just that one day. He's tracked everything. And we're almost to 50% of the cases. This was, as he pointed out, this is the first one that went to trial. It blew up in spectacular fashion. And so one of the things that's interesting, though, going back to Minnesota, I was going to write a post about this week, but I just could never get it done just because it was like, I did a post about this DOJ stuff this morning and I was just like, I can't even get my arms around it. It's too big. But what we're seeing in Minnesota is a lot more Americans are being arrested by ICE, right? Oh, yeah. And they're being arrested on false claims of assault. I mean, so there were Americans arrested by ICE in Chicago, again, on the same false claims of assault. And there were a bunch arrested on September 27th. There were a bunch of people, and there's actually a Benny Johnson video because he was tagging along with Kristi Noem, and he actually posted this video of 8 people who he called terrorists, and he claimed that they were being charged with terrorism. And what actually happened in that case is that ICE took them, drove them a mile away, and released them.
Wow. Yeah.
So, but compare that to Minnesota, those same people, because I think they realized in Chicago that oh shit, they're actually you assaulted them rather than they assaulted you. In Minnesota, those people are being arrested. There's a case of, it's kind of fucking nuts. Members of Congress keep trying to go into Whipple, into the detention facility in the Twin Cities, and they get denied. Right. So, but you've got legal observers who are being arrested.
Yes.
And so they're brought into the middle of Whipple and held for a couple of days until DOJ realizes that they can't be held any longer and they're released. There's at least one, and I think a couple of accounts of these legal observers who get held for, a day or 24 hours. And then that is the description that we're getting from inside Whipple. And it, of course, and then there's a separate cell for American citizens and all of the cells for non-American citizens, which are of course massive and no toilet facilities. Right. And they're trying to prevent lawyers from getting in. And then meanwhile, this week, the AP reported on, there's a whistleblower complaint, and the AP was the first to report on it, that DHS wrote a memo for itself saying that it can invade homes with only an administrative warrant, which isn't
without a judicial warrant, right? No judge signed off on it. That they can break down a door, go into a house, and go through it, tear up shit, do whatever without a warrant.
Which is what we're seeing, right? And now we know that there's paperwork behind it. We're also going to see stuff about, why DHS is counter-filming protesters and so on. But we'll talk about the Hmong guy in a second. But what's interesting to me is Minnesota doesn't have the prosecutors to charge all of these American citizens. Plus, I in my piece today on DOJ, that there have already been more habeas petition filings in Minnesota in these 3 weeks, in the 6,000 days of January, as there were in the entire year last year in Minnesota. And many of them are being granted because one of them that I discussed, for example, is a Venezuelan family of 6 who they were snatched. Same thing. They were that DHS invaded their home without a warrant, snatched all 6 of them, and a judge said, you got to let them free. Like, you didn't have a warrant to go snatch them. Right. So then there's the Hmong guy, right? So this is the 70-year-old Hmong guy who was snatched in his underwear
in -3 degree weather in Minnesota when he was snatched.
And his family was like, this, like, he's not who you say he was. So then Tricia McLaughlin said, oh, here's the people we were actually looking for. And she named 2 people who are Hmong. And she's like, oh, they used to live there. And then the local ABC affiliate said, oh, I know where this guy is. He's in state prison.
Oh, my God.
Like,
so they terrorized
exactly where those 2 people are. And then, and Tricia McLaughlin is sort of like, oh, well, you should give them to us. It's like, they're in prison. They're in prison because they committed crimes.
Right.
And then Minnesota Public Radio, and these are all linked in my post, go read them. The Minnesota Public Radio took DHS's, and God, I hope more journalists repeat this work, took DHS in every city. They're like, here's the worst of the worst that we arrested. There are 12, 13 people on the list. NPR took a look at them, and almost all of them were voluntarily turned. There's 2 exceptions. Almost all of them are voluntarily turned over by the state because the state will turn over criminals to DHS. One of them was turned over in 2012.
Oh my God.
Let me repeat that. They're going back to 2012 to fill out their worst of the worst list, and the guy was turned over. Another guy was in Ohio, not in Minnesota at all. So this is complete garbage. Like, the entire list is false claims about the worst of the worst, and they're using that to go arrest the Hmong guy and the 5-year-old and shoot Renee Good.
Oh my God.
To America's credit, it's not working. Like, back in September, I wrote my butt cracks and beer bellies post, and I stand by that. I think there's been recent work that I think kind of concludes I was right. But I argued back in September that the grotesqueness of this, seeing these ICE goons, 6 of them rolling around trying to arrest a single person. Another image from this week is an observer who was tackled to the ground by 3 ICE dudes. And then a fourth came up and sprayed pepper spray in his face while his face is down on the ground. And the guy who sprayed him is somebody identifiable. He's from Indiana. He's been doing similar things in multiple states. But those are gross pictures.
Yes.
There is a very small subset of the country that gets erotic pleasure out of them. Unfortunately, that small subset happens to include Stephen Miller. But for most people, that's not sexy. That's just not sexy.
It's disgusting.
And it is, however, spectacular. And so, Stephen Miller, I believed that he could make his fascism popular through use of spectacle. Another thing, by the way, that's going on. Speaking of spectacle, remember the helicopter attack on the apartment building?
Yes, in Chicago.
In Chicago,
right?
Those people are suing.
Good.
That guy's the landlord turned them over, voluntarily let DHS in, but he did it to empty out the building and get rid of his American citizen tenants and people of color. So now he's being investigated by the state of Illinois. The landlord is.
Good.
But that was meant to be this spectacular kind of Rambo thing. And there's so many images of the 5-year-old, of the Hmong guy, of the guy with his face driven into the pavement getting pepper sprayed. And honestly, as they expand DHS hiring, you have a lot more fat guys with beer bellies and their butt cracks sticking out. And it's just gross. I mean, and that is what is filling. That is the spectacle that Stephen Miller has created. And it's, and that is part of why his invasions have been backfiring. And that's before you get into, this is the good news, right? Like, fucking moron keeps invading places with community.
Right.
And, like in Los Angeles, you long had a set of activists who know how to respond to ICE because it's Los Angeles. And they did a good job. Chicago improved on the good job with the whistles and the community organization. And Minnesota, because it's Minnesota nice, has just, catapulted. And every time Stephen Miller invades a city, it creates this flourishing of civil society. Neighborhoods become
get together.
I don't want to. Minnesota always had that. Minnesota, it is what they say about Minnesota nice is absolutely 100% true. But nevertheless, you're seeing this solidarity rooted in geographic space that is, the collapse of that solidarity is one of the things that, laid the opportunity for fascism, and it's having the opposite effect. He is literally creating this flourishing social, civil society, which is the superpower that you use to fight fascism. That is literally the first thing you need to fight fascism. And then, holy shit, Minnesota is having a general strike today. Do you know how hard it is to people and everyone, faith community, schools, the state, general strike. It's amazing.
Yes. One thing that nobody's really talking about is, Trump wanted, or Stephen Miller actually wanted, he had a quota of 3,000 deportations every day or some nonsense like that, and claiming it's only going to be the worst of the worst. Of course, did you know we had that many murderers and rapists who were here illegally roaming our streets? No, because Obama deported them. Remember, even from the left, there was a lot of criticism. He was called the deporter in chief. He was successful in doing that. The criminals who weren't supposed to be here, most of them were deported. So that's why they're targeting people just because of the color of their skin or the accent or language they speak.
Right. David Byer, who is Cato's immigration expert, has done a series of reports, and I invite people to go look them up, because at the beginning, a year ago, he was saying we now have the numbers for what Trump accomplished his first term, and he made the country less safe, because by pushing up numbers, he was focusing not on the worst of the worst, but on, because to get the numbers, you have to start racially profiling.
That's right.
So, and he's done a bunch of follow-up reports and shown that 70% of the people being snatched right now don't have criminal records. And Trisha is lying about that. Kristi Noem is lying about it. Everyone's lying about it. But yeah, what you're getting, and that 3,000, by the way, comes from the inflated numbers Stephen Miller used to get Donald Trump elected. So he was like, 25 million people are in this country. So he took that number, divided it by 365.
God.
And said, well, to get to the number we promised, we need to find 3,000 people a day. They've never met the 3,000 people a day. They never come close. 1,000 is a good day for them. But that is precisely, and they, it's interesting. Washington Examiner is always this stat was first reported, I think, by Washington Examiner way back in May or something. And that has driven policy and has driven this focus on people who have accents.
Yep.
As opposed to, I read this court filing today from Minnesota. Minnesota, of course, is trying to stop all of this. And it was from a woman who was obviously born in a Latino country, in a Spanish-speaking country, but has been here for decades. And so she was asked by an ICE guy who himself is Latino, where are you from? And she said, I'm from here. And once they discovered, they used the facial recognition tool, and they're like, no, she's an American citizen. We can't snatch her. And the guy, the Latino ICE dude was like, no, we've got to. And finally his supervisor was like, you cannot arrest this woman. She is an American citizen. And the American citizen said to him, he said, oh, I'm stopping you because of your accent. She's like, but you have the same accent. Right? You have the same accent. So after the supervisor said, you can't arrest this woman, he said to her under his breath and in Spanish, I'm coming back for you.
Oh, my God. Ugh. But you know what? The extreme court said they could detain people based on their accent or the language they speak or what they look like or what their job is.
Well, and then Kavanaugh backed off of that.
Right. Well,
but it's going to be, yeah. But what's going to be really interesting, and again, like, I don't want this to happen to anybody. And when you hear like Ilhan Omar talks about this in really good terms, unsurprisingly, she's like, they've got 3,000, 5,000 people now invaded into Minnesota. That's more than all of Minnesota's cops put together. This is clearly an invasion. And, Stephen Miller decided he was going to invade Minnesota because he is viscerally offended by Somalis, and he's gotten Donald Trump viscerally offended by Somalis, in part because Donald Trump hates Ilhan Omar. But the problem with that is, and in the language, in the Kavanaugh stop language, he said, well, it sort of makes sense to invade Los Angeles because it has, and he cited the fake numbers that DOJ had given him, but he's like, well, 11% of Los Angeles is undocumented. Those numbers are inflated, but like he used the numbers and he said 11%. The problem is Minnesota has a lower percentage of undocumented people than most of the rest of the country. It's got 2%. And the reason being is that the Hmong and the Somalis, which are two of the significant foreign-born communities, the Hmong and the Somalis, have been here for decades. Have been in the, that Hmong guy came to the United States in the 1970s, right?
Wow. Yeah. Before most of the people who are arresting him were born.
Stephen Miller was born.
That's right.
Before Stephen Miller was born.
That's right. Yeah, it's truly sickening. But is there? You've said we're pivoting or something. We had a Supreme Court hearing this week, and it appeared like they're not going to go Trump's way. The breaks are happening more and more. Republicans are starting to say, what, he's wrong here, and calling out Trump's shit. And I think Davos did a lot of damage to him. On the world stage, there he was, going in with all this bluster. He's the bully. He's going to get Greenland, or is it Iceland? I mean, confusing Greenland and Iceland on the world stage as he's saying we need to take it over for our, national security and strategy and whatever. He just showed what a fucking idiot he is. Or
and incidentally, on the Iceland Greenland thing, some propagandist, I forget which outlet it was, let's assume Newsmax, but it's a right-wing propaganda outlet. Right. Some woman from that propaganda outlet said Donald Trump confused Iceland and Greenland 4 times.
Yep.
And I think because it was a propaganda outlet, Caroline Levitt said no, his written statement said Greenland. And it got community noted beyond Gazuha.
Well, what she said was, no, it was scripted that he would say Greenland is just a chunk of ice, which the fact they put that in the script is bullshit. He did say that, but he kept calling it Iceland. Right.
But then it got community noted. And again, what like the community note has gotten a lot of attention. What hasn't gotten as much attention is that conversation was started by a propagandist. And even the propagandist was like, oh, Donald Trump just called Greenland Iceland. Mm-hmm. And it's little things like that, that I think you know, who knows what happens, really? Who knows?
Right. But, you know, then he did his old taco thing. Trump always chickens out, because he claimed that he had a great meeting with I don't know, the UN Secretary General and the people from Denmark, and they came. We got it done. It's a long-term deal, but we got it done. And no, everybody knows. He's bullshitting. He's lying as always. He got nothing. He got exactly what we already have. And he's claiming victory. So, I mean, the world really, it was out there in full display this week. And he claims, now, under Biden, nobody respected us. And, now everybody loves us. It's bullshit. It's why I call it opposite world.
And that's, again, there's so much of that in the New York Times interview that they didn't call out. It's just, he really, I mean, obviously it's narcissism, right?
Yes.
Like we don't need a professional at this point to diagnose him as a malignant narcissist. No. But the narcissism and the way in which being surrounded by sycophants feeds it guarantees, and I mean this, guarantees that he will make incredibly stupid decisions, because, this Greenland thing, I need it psychologically, and people are not, for example, telling him, literally, you can get what you want without invading.
That's right.
Literally, you can just build a new base if you want.
That's right.
Right? And so those two things absolutely guarantee that he will do things that harm the United States. And, Republicans, the other thing we had this week was the Jack Smith hearing.
Yesterday.
As this was all going on, and it was, frustrating. It was like every single Republican. I actually think there were, I need to go back and count how many simply didn't show up. Oh. That's happening more in hearings, and people are not necessarily calling them out. Because there should be 2 years ago, when in the House, when because the Republicans had a majority in the House, in hearings, the Republicans would go, there would be a half hour to an hour after the Democrats had run out of members, where Republicans would get to ask questions without any kind of rebuttal. And yesterday's was maybe one person. That says that a bunch of people in HJC didn't show up. But everyone who did show up did perform this game of how dare you do this to Jack Smith. My favorite part was Jared Moskowitz, who listed all of the comments of the people who, Chip Roy especially, Troy Nehls. He was like, here's what you said on January 6th. Here's how terrified you were on January 6th. And it really gave, it demonstrated the degree to which these people know they're lying, and nevertheless have to perform for Donald Trump, that there's this big outrage.
Yeah, I saw that you, I have a thing against Jared Moskowitz. By the way, he was the congressman in my district in Florida when I left. He's just a showboater. And what I didn't like about what he did was that he didn't ask Jack Smith a question.
No, he didn't. But you know what? I don't think Democrats used his presence there to much good use at all.
No, a couple of them did, but that's about it. Pramila Jayapal did. Steve Cohen from Tennessee did. Becca Balint, who I had never heard of before, from Vermont.
She's smart. She's very, very smart. Yeah, she's always, the problem with Rebecca Balint is she's relatively junior, so you always have to wait until the end of the hearing to hear her. Right. But her questions, and I forget the woman from North Carolina, she also always asks good questions.
Yeah, she's one of the newer ones too. But my favorite, and I did yesterday's show. All I did was I pulled clips, I watched the whole thing, and I played a lot of them back. Was this guy from Wisconsin, Glenn Grothman? Did you hear him?
Oh yeah, I laughed at him.
He was
In fact, I laughed at him. And then what I was doing when I was watching is I was writing like substantive. This is what I do generally now. I was writing substantive posts on Blue Sky, but going onto Shitter and adding the Republicans. And I did that with Grothman. I was like, oh, Grothman may be the only person in the world who still believes Donald Trump's con. And Grothman came back and said, no, I really do believe Donald Trump's con. It was hilarious.
Well, it was hysterical because he didn't know what he was saying. Let me just play.
And Grothman, by the way, often looks inebriated in hearings. He looked much more sober yesterday than he does. I mean, I don't know whether he is inebriated, but he always appears inebriated in these hearings.
Yes.
And he looked far more sober yesterday than he tends to in hearings.
Well, for anybody who didn't see it or hear it, I spent too much time on it yesterday, but let me just share the beginning of this. And because he started right off the bat.
Trump to myself, but anybody who says that Donald Trump thought he won that election, that is just plain not true.
What?
No way, unless he's the best actor in the history of this building.
We agree.
That Donald
That was
Trump
Jamie Raskin. We agree.
believe
Order.
that Donald Trump did not believe. Donald Trump did not believe he lost that election. He just didn't. No way.
And then at the end, my God. And then he's just trying to recover from that. At the very end, he goes, here, just listen. Here.
Do you really believe that President Trump thinks he lost that election?
Yes. Our investigation following the facts and the law determined that...
No way. Thank you. That's enough.
It was just classic. I'm sorry. So, yes.
No way.
No way.
An interesting point is Grothman was the only one to raise those bank documents. And I wrote about this. These are documents that Chuck Grassley released. And when he released them, I was like, yay, Chuck Grassley just doxed the entire Republican Party. There was like this big faux scandal going on. Everyone's like, oh my God, they got me. And I was like, well, yeah, that's because this is what Donald Trump was doing with the money. There were a couple of theories, and we knew about those theories in real time. They were reported in real time. One of them was that Donald Trump was basically using money raised based off his lies to pay off his closest allies, right? So Dan Scavino, for example, got a huge chunk of money. And so Donald Trump had told his rubes, we're raising money to pursue election integrity, and we're going to go spend it on bribing Dan Scavino to stay loyal to us. And there, some of that was funding to show, because he kept testing, right? Did I really lose the election? Yeah, you really lost the election. And then there was also the funding. Again, he raised the money promising he was going to do election integrity to pay for defense witnesses, to pay for loyal witnesses to have their lawyers paid for, right? One of the most powerful moments of the testimony, by the way, is Jack Smith explained that Stan Woodward was full of shit when he accused Jay Bratt of threatening him. And that was actually an explanation that needed to happen. And that, by the way, Democrats didn't ask him about, even though the filings on that are public. And it's like, I don't think Democrats did as good a job as they should have. They didn't, like, there's so much that's public that I have pointed to. In fact, I pointed to last year when Dan Goldman claimed there was nothing public. So Dan Goldman should know about it, because I kind of shamed Dan Goldman about it. But
and he didn't do great yesterday either. Dan Goldman.
He did ask why. I mean, he was one of the last people, and it was only then that anybody asked Jack Smith why he had subpoenaed those call records. That should have been the first question asked to undercut what the Republicans were doing, and it just didn't happen. But no, the Republicans, and I wrote a post about this, the Republicans have, like, after Chuck Grassley released him, everyone's going panicky. And then I do a post and I'm like, yay, Chuck Grassley doxed the entire Republican Party, because it's incredibly useful information. It describes what banks all of these movement conservatives use, and not their movement radicals, let's be honest. And it describes how the payments move. And I'm like, this is fucking a gold mine, right? Thank you, Chuck Grassley. Republicans didn't ask about that. They claimed that it was a big scandal, and almost no one besides Grothman asked about that.
Wow. Eric Swalwell at one point said, the Republican colleagues are a joke. Good thing they're not under oath, because they'd have to tell you what they really think of Trump. And he went on to, say what.
And he claimed that Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz was like chief among them, calling him a idiot and everything. That was excellent too. So there was Hank Johnson of Georgia was very good. Some of them.
Hank Johnson's always good.
Yep.
Hank Johnson is one of those getting pretty old members of Congress, but he always brings it. He's very effective, in my opinion.
Yeah. So there were some good moments. Enough of them didn't, we're too interested in hearing the sound of their own voices and not asking him questions to let Jack Smith say what he hasn't had the opportunity to say in public before.
Right.
So there was that.
Yeah. In fact, Jasmine Crockett alluded to this, but then backed off of a question that she had asked in the deposition, which was, let's talk about the threats. Jack Smith did repeat what he said in his deposition, which is, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump, but he didn't get to, except in responding to questions from Republicans, get to explain the full impact of the threats against Ruby Freeman, of, how bad the threats against Mike Pence were, how bad, and that, I think, whatever. Here we are. It's Friday.
Yes, it is.
6,750th day of January. And we still have a fucking week left.
1 week left?
I'm sorry, we do. Yeah. It's like there's still a week. It is January 23rd.
Oh, in January. Oh, yes. Right. Oh, I'm thinking if it were only a week left. But we have 3 years. By the way, before we go, back to Davos for a minute. Trump's Board of Peace. And what, so the Board of Peace, he talked about every country he wants in, I'm being selective. And who was on the stage with him? A representative of Bahrain, a representative of Morocco, the president of Argentina, because that's what $40 billion will get you. Prime Minister of Armenia, president of Azerbaijan, prime minister of Bulgaria, Hungary, president of Indonesia. I mean, these are the countries: Jordan, Kosovo, Pakistan, Paraguay, Qatar,
Belarus.
Belarus isn't on here. There was nobody there yesterday.
Yeah, there was nobody. They may be sanctioned.
Foreign Affairs Minister from Saudi Arabia. So they sent their top people. Foreign Affairs Minister of Turkey, a representative from the UAE, the president of Uzbekistan, and Prime Minister of Mongolia. That's who was there. But did you hear about the presentation that Jared Kushner made to this Board of Peace? These are the renderings he showed of New Gaza and New Rafah. I mean, the New Gaza one is just unbelievable. They're going to put up these buildings along the Gaza Strip, along the coast. And the pictures we've seen of the coastline in Gaza are, everything burnt out, and poor refugees, people who've been attacked for the last however long, walking to wherever, to nowhere. And this is what they think they're going to do to it. It's despicable. It's just really disgusting. So that's what I had to say about that.
Yep.
All right. Are we done?
Yeah, it's a wrap.
Okay. I'll stick a fork in it. Yes. And there is another week before we get to the end of January. Well, such as it is. We will be back next week to do it all over again. Thank you, Marcy Wheeler. Find her at emptywheel.net, of course, on the Blue Skies, and fucking with the right-wingers on Shitter as well. All right. Thanks, Marcy. Have a great weekend if you can.
Yep. Have a safe week.
You too. Peace out.